I've noticed a trend online. Every time a conservative supporter says something that a liberal supporter disagrees with, the liberal supporter replies with, "That's disinformation." I see it all the time. It happens to me, even when I state objective facts. In one case, I had someone on Blue Sky share some of my content and then saying that I was an AI bot spreading disinfo. When I responded with a picture of myself to prove that I'm not AI and asked the poster what was misinformation about my original post, they shockingly went silent. But still, he or she didn't take down their post where they ironically called me an AI bot spreading disinfo. And from my view, or should I say the lens I get from my social media feeds, liberal supporters are running around screaming disinformation when they are seemingly distributing vast amounts of it themselves. Now, look, I'm not saying that people on the right don't get the facts wrong. They often do. And they often make posts I entirely disagree with. For example, many of them bring political leaders' kids into their posts, which I would never do. But that's not misinformation, that's just being an asshole. Anyways, let's cut to one of the most common and frustrating pieces of misinformation I've seen circulating lately. This claim that Pierre Poilievre personally owns shares in Brookfield. The Toronto Star even ran an article titled "Pierre Poilievre Holds Investments in Brookfield, the same company he attacks Mark Carney over." At first glance, that sounds scandalous. But here's the problem. It's a carefully crafted half-truth. Poilievre doesn't own Brookfield stock. He's invested in the Vanguard FTSE Canada Index ETF, a fund that holds 52 Canadian companies, one of which happens to be Brookfield. To say he holds investments in Brookfield is like saying you're an athlete because you bought a sports jersey with your own name on it. Sure, there's exposure to the company, but it's passive, indirect, and spread across an entire index. This isn't some obscure technicality. Canada's stock market is notoriously top-heavy. The TSX is dominated by a handful of giants like Brookfield, RBC, and CN Rail. If you invest in any broad Canadian ETF, you're almost certainly holding fragments of these companies. The Toronto Star knows this. They also know that slapping Poilievre and Brookfield together in a headline implies a direct financial stake, the kind that could suggest hypocrisy. The article's title is technically accurate in the same way it's technically accurate to say you own a coal mine if you've got $50 in a retirement fund that includes energy stocks. Most readers won't click through to learn that Brookfield represents less than 2% of the ETF. They'll just remember the headline's implication. Poilievre's a hypocrite. That's what I call disinformation by dilution. It's when you take a sliver of fact, drown it in misleading context, and serve it up to people who already want to distrust the person that it's being said about. If we're going to start labeling indirect ETF exposure as owning a company, then half the country owns Brookfield through their pensions. But of course, that's not the narrative here. The goal isn't clarity, it's rage clicks. Then there's this post by Dean Blundell discussing Canada's sale of US bonds into the Treasury market. Despite its flaws, this piece has been circulating on Facebook, so I feel it's important to address. Now, I'm not going to dive into all the false or questionable claims Blundell makes, or should I say ChatGPT, or whatever LLM Dean used to generate this word salad. For example, he talks about which countries are selling US government bonds, which wasn't known at the time and really still isn't. He also makes unverified claims about how Mark Carney allegedly threatened Trump in a private call to dump US treasuries. An assertion that no one else in the media that I can find who, actually knows things would make. Most readers have no idea what any of these words mean, and I suspect neither does Dean. But that's not the purpose. The purpose is to use complicated words and prove that Mark Carney is a great businessman. But let's just pull up this specific paragraph. Rewind a bit. While Trump was gearing up his trade war machine, Carney, Canada's Prime Minister, wasn't just sitting in Ottawa twiddling his thumbs. He'd been quietly increasing Canada's holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds, over $350 billion worth by early 2025, part of the $8.5 trillion foreign countries hold in U.S. debt. Let's unpack the inaccuracies here. The Post claims that Carney has been increasing Canada's holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds to over $350 billion by early 2025. However, according to U.S. Treasury filings, Canada's holdings have actually been declining, not increasing. Next, the Post inaccurately states that Carney, as Prime Minister, was responsible for this alleged increase that never happened in bond holdings. Not only did Carney not become Prime Minister until March 15, 2025, but more importantly, the management of Canada's foreign exchange reserves, including U.S. Treasury bonds, is not the Prime Minister's responsibility. The decision to buy or sell these bonds rests with the Bank of Canada, an independent institution led by Governor Tiff Macklem. Therefore, even if Carney were Prime Minister at the time, which he wasn't, and if they increased their bond holdings, which they didn't, he would not have the authority to dictate these financial moves.
So, you're dumb.
Then we have this guy, Path to Where.
All right, this is brilliant. Most people know that Canada recently sold some bonds, $3.5 billion worth. And I've had a hard time recording this video because it's such an interesting topic. I get all hyped up about it. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but this is really cool. So the reason we did this has multiple factors to it, and it's quite interesting. What we're doing with that is, so we actually sold Canadian bonds in US dollar. I thought we were selling bonds that we initially had, and we were just auctioning them off because we didn't want them anymore. No, we were issuing new bonds. So we issued Canadian bonds in US dollars, and first thing that does is it gauges the interest in the Canadian economy. So it gauges the confidence in the Canadian economy for 5-year outlook, because these are 5-year bonds. So there was 4 times the demand compared to the supply that we were offering, which is a really good sign. So that means people are thinking the Canadian economy is going to grow. Secondly, it gives us a bunch of money, $3.5 billion worth of US dollars to go do trade deals with, or just hold on to. Because usually we do that so we have actually US currency in the country to utilize in our banking system or for economic trade deals. However, if we utilize that money relatively quickly, so we go ahead and spend it on new defense contracts, let's say, to buy Saab planes. So going to Europe and looking at defense contracts for things like that new Gripen, which will be built in Canada and supply 6,000 jobs apparently, boosting our economy, being able to utilize our own steel and aluminum and titanium and magnesium and zinc and so on and so forth, all of our materials that we have here in Canada that we don't have to then sell to the United States. Are things starting to make sense now? Step 3, we are slightly betting on the fact the US economy is going to decline over the next 5 years. And as long as the decline is, roughly 6 to 7 cents, so we don't lose out on the yield of those bonds. Effectively, we come out a break-even situation. But here's the thing. If our dollar goes on par with the US, we effectively end up in a net positive situation of $1.4 billion on $3.5 billion worth of bonds. Mark Carney, good job.
Okay, so this rant about Canada's $3.5 billion US dollar denominated bond issuance is absolutely incoherent. It's got massive views, massive shares, it's all over social media, and I hate to break it to you guys, but it's packed with misinformation and wild leaps. First, this guy is acting like Canada issuing bonds in US dollars is some brilliant novel move. Nope, Canada has been doing this since 2009. It's a standard financial tool, not a flashy new concept cooked up yesterday by Mark Carney. Then the guy hypes up the 4-fold oversubscription as a rare sign of confidence in Canada's economy. In reality, high demand is par for the course in Canadian bond auctions. It reflects steady investor trust, not some economic unicorn event. Next, he claims these bonds are funding defense contracts like buying Saab planes to boost Canada's mining industry. That's a stretch with no evidence. Canada can issue bonds in Canadian dollars and convert them to US dollars for trade if needed. There's no reason to tie US dollar-denominated bonds to this narrative. His logic is like saying, I ate Cheerios today, so I'm obviously running a marathon. Even if you've been eating Cheerios every morning since 2009 and never ran a marathon in your entire life. It's just a stupid forward-looking statement attached to a meaningless event. Even worse, this rant pins this on Mark Carney, suggesting it's a sly bet against the US economy. Wrong. I talked to bond traders. These issuances aren't some contrarian bet on Canada's part. They are to serve a niche group of investors wanting US dollar-denominated Canadian bonds. And even better, the bond sales this guy is referring to happened 3 days before Carney stepped on as Prime Minister. And the comments of this video are even dumber. One person says Mark Carney's a genius playing chess while Poilievre's stuck on checkers. Another says Poilievre wouldn't have a clue. Of course he wouldn't. This TikToker's rant is incoherent and full of bullshit assumptions. You don't need to be a bond expert to smell this guy's lack of understanding. I can do it too. Have you guys seen these "Do you believe in the poll" people at Pierre Poilievre rallies? It's not random. So I looked up the domain registry for CanadianRealPolls.com and found out that they're owned by a man named Paul Machucci, who has photos of himself all over the internet with Doug Ford. Now, Ford's painting Poilievre as a poll-denying extremist. Classic misdirection. Enter Corey Tanecki, Ford's campaign mastermind. Ford praised him as Poilievre's savior, then Tanecki ripped Poilievre's campaign as malpractice on CTV. A setup? You bet. Word is, Ford wants the conservative crown to himself. Now meet Jenny Byrne, Poilievre's campaign boss. Ford and Tanecki can't stand her. Why? Her nickname's Bee. Sounds like Byrne, right? Wrong. She's the queen bee and a legit beekeeper. So why is this juicy? Here's the kicker. Ford's been sabotaging her, and then bam, he swallows a bee on live TV.
Holy Christ. I just swallowed a bee.
And there you have it. This is payback for Jenny Byrne's sting operation. See, guys, I can mix up some facts and make some stuff up. Wasn't that fun? Next, let's talk about how the Liberals claim Pierre Poilievre wants to ban abortion. Pierre has been clear on this in the past.
Poilievre government would not introduce or pass legislation restricting abortion. I can guarantee you there will be no laws restricting abortion passed when I'm Prime Minister.
Poilievre has consistently stated for years that he will not legislate on abortion, supporting a pro-choice stance. And no, despite Liberal claims, there is no evidence he's influenced by American evangelicals. In fact, anti-abortion groups actually oppose him. Then there are claims he's against the LGBTQ+ community. Here's a Liberal post about how he wasn't at a flag-raising ceremony. I also noticed that no one cares about how the Fords used to routinely leave Toronto during Gay Pride, one of the biggest gay festivals in the world, of which one of them was mayor at the time. Anyways, we're told that Pierre hates the gays. But that doesn't make sense, because he told the CBC that he disagrees with a Conservative MP who wants to vote against same-sex marriage. It's almost like maybe if you have a couple of loony MPs on your side who have some loony ideas, they don't represent your leadership or vision for the country. You can't control everyone, especially when there are hundreds of people running for each party. I mean, is anyone suggesting that just because Ryan Turnbull likes sniffing glue that all Liberals are about to demand the entire country do it? The Toronto Star tells us queer people and allies have every reason to be very nervous about a Pierre Poilievre government. Well, then his dad is going to hate to hear this, because his dad is gay. From the National Catholic Register, we learned that Poilievre's adoptive parents separated when Pierre was around 12, and Donald later came out as gay. While Pierre lived afterward with Marlene, he maintained a positive relationship with his adoptive father that continues through today. Another piece of Liberal-driven disinformation targets Pierre's lack of security clearance, often framed as a scandal proving he's unfit to lead. Critics, especially Liberal supporters online, claim Poilievre's refusal to obtain clearance shows he's hiding something or lacks the credibility to handle sensitive intelligence. This narrative conveniently ignores the reality. Poilievre could get clearance in under 10 minutes if he chose to. As a member of parliament, the process is straightforward. Background checks are routine for elected officials. He's had it before. However, obtaining clearance comes with a catch. It muzzles recipients. And with clearance, Poilievre would be privy to classified briefings but barred from discussing them publicly, even if they reveal government failures or scandals like Liberal candidate Paul Chang's shocking suggestion to turn a Conservative rival over to China for a bounty. Without clearance, Poilievre retains the freedom to criticize and expose such issues without legal constraints. The Liberal push to paint this as a flaw is a deliberate distraction, twisting a strategic choice into a supposed character defect. Okay, so let's wrap it up. The weaponization of disinformation as a silencing tactic underscores a troubling trend in online discourse: the conflation of disagreement with deceit. Media outlets and partisan actors exploit technical truths to imply hypocrisy or malfeasance, banking on readers' reluctance to scrutinize context. This erosion of nuance fuels polarization, where what is said matters less than who says it. While misinformation exists across the entire political spectrum, dismissing opposing views as disinformation without engagement risks normalizing intellectual laziness and stifling debate. But I guess it isn't about debate. It's about winning. And right now, the Liberals are playing that hand to a T. All right, guys, that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor, smash that like button, subscribe, ring that notification bell. Guys, if there's stories you want me to cover, let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching, everyone.